The Bahamas, a place where the ocean meets the sky in a seamless stretch of blue, where time slows down, and worries fade beneath the golden sun. For many, it's the definition of paradise, an escape from the routines of everyday life. For Ron and Becky Bramlage, this was exactly what they had envisioned when they planned their family vacation. A break from the responsibilities of work, school, and the constant rush of life back home in Junction City, Kansas. This trip wasn't just about relaxation, it was about spending quality time together, creating memories that their children Brandon, Boston, Bo, and Roxanne would carry with them for a lifetime. The past week had been nothing short of magical. The Bramlages had embraced everything the Bahamas had to offer. Mornings filled with snorkeling adventures, afternoons spent exploring hidden coves and wandering through bustling island markets, evenings watching the sun melt into the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The children's laughter echoed through the sandy shores as they chased the waves, their footprints disappearing as quickly as they were made. For Becky, watching her children experience the world with such wonder and excitement was the greatest joy of all. She had always been a devoted mother, deeply involved in their education and community. She took pride in being a school board president, but this, watching her children's faces light up as they built sandcastles and searched for seashells, this was what truly mattered. Ron, too, was in his element. A successful businessman, he was always looking for ways to push forward, to provide the best for his family. But here, away from conference calls and business meetings, he was simply Dad. The one teaching his kids how to steer a boat, encouraging them to jump into the clear turquoise water, and making sure every moment counted. But no matter how perfect a vacation is, it always has to end. June 7, 2012. The sun was barely rising as the Bramlage family packed their bags, the last remnants of their island adventure neatly tucked away. There was a quiet hum of activity in their villa, zippered suitcases being closed, last-minute checks to make sure nothing was forgotten. Becky ensured that everyone had their belongings, calling out reminders in her usual caring but efficient tone. Ron, meanwhile, reviewed their flight plan, making sure everything was in order. The children, still sleepy-eyed, moved through their morning routine with a mix of excitement and reluctance. They were happy to be heading home, but a part of them wished they could stay just a little longer. Outside, the island breeze carried the scent of salt and morning dew. The tropical air was warm, even in the early hours. As the family made their way to Treasure Cay Airport, they took one last look at the ocean, so vast, so peaceful. It was a farewell to paradise. The private airstrip was quiet when they arrived. The Pilatus PC-12, their sleek, single-engine aircraft, stood ready. To an outsider, it was just another small plane. But to the Bramlages, it was more than that. It was freedom. The ability to travel on their own schedule, to explore places commercial flights couldn't take them. Ron took a deep breath as he did his final walk-around inspection of the aircraft. He had flown this plane before. It was powerful, reliable, and designed for single-pilot operation. But it was also complex, requiring precise handling, especially in challenging conditions. Inside the cockpit, the controls felt familiar beneath his hands. The hum of the engine as it powered up was a comforting sound. This was routine. He had done it countless times before. As Becky settled into her seat beside him, she reached over and gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Behind them, the children were strapped in, chatting about what they were looking forward to back home, seeing their friends, their pets, sleeping in their own beds. Normal things. Everyday things. Things they never got the chance to do again. At exactly 9:45 a.m., Ron Bramlage received clearance for takeoff. The Pilatus PC-12 began rolling down the runway, its engine roaring as it gathered speed. The tropical scenery blurred past the windows, the palm trees swaying in the distance. And then lift off. As the plane ascended, the Bahamas stretched out beneath them in a breathtaking view of blues and greens. The islands, the beaches, the winding coastlines, it was a view they had seen many times before, but never quite like this. Becky turned her head to look at the children, smiling as she saw them staring out the window, lost in the beauty of the world below. No one knew that this was the last time they would ever see it. The plan was simple. Their first stop, Fort Pierce, Florida. A brief layover for refueling and customs clearance. From there, they would embark on the longest leg of their journey, over 1,000 miles back to Kansas. Nothing unusual. Nothing out of the ordinary. As the aircraft climbed higher, Ron settled into the rhythm of flying. He made contact with air traffic control, checked the instruments, ensured everything was running smoothly. The weather ahead looked clear. For now. For the next 2 hours, the Bramlages soared across the sky, unaware that fate had already set events into motion, events that would turn this peaceful flight into a disaster. At 11:50 a.m., the aircraft touched down at St. Lucie County International Airport in Florida. The family stretched their legs, grabbed some snacks, and prepared for the final stretch home. Ron used the break to file his next flight plan, checking the weather one last time. There were reports of worsening conditions further north, but nothing that seemed impossible to navigate. At 12:05 p.m., they took off again. The runway disappeared beneath them as the Pilatus PC-12 climbed back into the sky. Ron adjusted the autopilot. The aircraft was performing well. Everything seemed fine. But a storm was brewing ahead. And in a matter of minutes, their fate would be sealed. Flying is an art of precision, patience, and preparedness. For Ron Bramlage, aviation wasn't just a hobby, it was a passion. A symbol of success, independence, and adventure. From the moment he obtained his private pilot certificate in 1994, he had spent years honing his skills, accumulating over 755 flight hours, a respectable amount for a non-commercial pilot. But experience in the sky is more than just numbers. It's about the depth of training, the ability to react under pressure, and most crucially, the capability to handle the unexpected. And when it came to that, Ron was vulnerable in ways he never fully realized. Outside of aviation, Ron Bramlage was a man who excelled in everything he did. A successful businessman and real estate developer, he had built a name for himself, carrying on the legacy of his family's influence in Junction City, Kansas. He was a figure of leadership, a man who believed in control and self-reliance. Flying gave him that same sense of control. Unlike commercial flights, where pilots operate under strict regulations and rigorous recurrent training, Private pilots have far more freedom in their decision-making. They can fly when they choose, rely on their own judgment, and often go long periods without the kind of structured proficiency checks that commercial pilots undergo. Ron had always been confident in his abilities, and for most flights, that confidence had served him well. But confidence without consistent practice can be dangerous, especially when flying complex aircraft under difficult conditions. And on June 7, 2012, confidence wouldn't be enough. The Pilatus PC-12 was no ordinary private aircraft. Designed as a high-performance, single-engine turboprop, it was built for versatility capable of carrying up to 9 passengers, cruising at speeds over 300 miles per hour, and handling long-distance flights with ease. It was widely used by private owners, air ambulance services, and even the military. But with that power came complexity. Unlike smaller planes Ron had flown before, the Pilatus PC-12 required extensive training to master. Its advanced systems, autopilot functions, and powerful engine meant that pilots needed not just experience, but regular hands-on training to maintain proficiency. And while Ron was certified to fly it, he had only logged 38 hours in this specific aircraft. 38 hours. That's all the time he had spent flying the PC-12 before trusting it to take his family home. Pilots don't just train to fly, they train to handle emergencies. And one of the most challenging situations any pilot can face is flying in instrument meteorological conditions, IMC, where visibility is so poor that they must rely entirely on their instruments to navigate. Ron had learned to fly under visual flight rules, VFR, meaning he was most comfortable flying in clear skies, using landmarks and the horizon as reference points. But in bad weather, when clouds and storms obscure the view, pilots must switch to instrument flight rules, IFR, a far more demanding skill set. Ron was legally certified to fly in instrument conditions. But in practice, he was dangerously out of practice. Over the past 8 years, he had logged less than 4 hours of actual instrument flight time. That meant his ability to react to sudden loss of visibility, reliance on autopilot, and manual aircraft control in bad weather was limited at best. And as fate would have it, he was about to fly into the kind of conditions that required expert instrument handling. At 12:11 p.m., shortly after taking off from Fort Pierce, Florida, Ron was in contact with Miami Center air traffic controllers responsible for guiding aircraft through the region. The skies were still clear, but ahead of them, conditions were rapidly changing. A large storm system, stretching nearly 30 miles in diameter, was forming along their route. Air traffic control advised Ron to deviate southward to avoid it, a standard precaution when facing heavy precipitation and turbulence. Ron acknowledged the instruction. But deviating meant adjusting his flight plan, manually recalculating the route, and relying more on instrument guidance, something that, given his lack of recent training, may have made him uneasy. Despite the warning, the Bramlage family's aircraft continued to climb into worsening conditions. The turbulence increased. The horizon outside the cockpit disappeared as the aircraft entered thick cloud cover. At that moment, Ron Bramlage was no longer just flying, he was fighting for control. Flying in instrument conditions is difficult but manageable with autopilot assistance. Modern aircraft like the Pilatus PC-12 come equipped with sophisticated autopilot systems that help pilots maintain altitude, heading, and stability in poor visibility. But at 12:13 p.m., something went horribly wrong. The autopilot disengaged. In a split second, the plane's smooth and controlled flight turned into a struggle against gravity. For an experienced instrument-rated pilot, regaining manual control would have been challenging but possible. But for Ron, who hadn't practiced manual instrument flying in nearly a decade, this was a nightmare scenario. Instead of immediately stabilizing the aircraft, his instincts led him to make a fatal mistake. He focused on troubleshooting the autopilot instead of flying the plane. The aircraft, now without automated stabilization, began drifting into an unstable attitude. Within moments, it started to spiral downward. The force of the descent intensified, pressing the Bramlage family against their seats. At this point, disorientation would have set in. Without a clear horizon and with gravity pulling in multiple directions, pilots suffering from spatial disorientation can lose all sense of up and down. They may instinctively pull the controls in the wrong direction, making the situation even worse. And that's exactly what happened. Ron, desperately trying to recover, likely pulled back too hard, causing excessive stress on the aircraft. The wings and stabilizers couldn't withstand the force. And then catastrophic structural failure. At 12:14 p.m., the aircraft was in a violent spiral dive. The intense G-forces were unbearable. Then a devastating breakup mid-air. The wings tore away. The fuselage shattered apart. In the chaos, 13-year-old Boston Bramlage was ejected from the aircraft, his body found far from the crash site. The rest of the wreckage plummeted into the swampy terrain of Lake Wales, Florida. There were no survivors. When an aircraft crashes, it leaves behind more than just wreckage, it leaves questions. For the Bramlage family, their flight home was supposed to be routine. There was no distress call, no clear sign of mechanical failure before the tragic descent. So what exactly had happened in those final, harrowing moments in the sky? The answers would take 2 years to uncover. As investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, arrived at the remote crash site near Lake Wales, Florida, they faced a daunting task, piecing together the final moments of November 950 Kilo Alpha, the Pilatus PC-12 that had been carrying the Bramlage family. The first responders who reached the site were met with a grim reality. The aircraft had disintegrated before impact, scattering debris across a wide radius. The wreckage was partially submerged in a swampy, wooded area, making the recovery process even more challenging. Among the most chilling discoveries was the body of 13-year-old Boston Bramlage, found far from the main wreckage, confirming what investigators feared: he had been ejected mid-air, a sign that the plane had broken apart while still in flight. Other key findings at the crash site included the fuselage, wings, and tail sections separated from each other, indicating structural failure before impact. Severe twisting and tearing of the metal, suggesting extreme aerodynamic forces had ripped the aircraft apart. No evidence of an in-flight fire or explosion, ruling out mechanical failure as an initial cause. The aircraft's avionics and flight instruments, though heavily damaged, contained crucial data that could help investigators reconstruct the flight path. With no immediate signs of external sabotage or a catastrophic engine failure, investigators turned their focus toward a more likely cause: pilot error and loss of control in bad weather. But what exactly led to this loss of control? To understand what had gone wrong, investigators needed to recreate the aircraft's final 6 minutes in the sky. Using radar data, air traffic control recordings, and recovered flight instruments, they began piecing together a timeline. 12:05 p.m., the Pilatus PC-12 departs from Fort Pierce, Florida, climbing to 9,000 feet. 12:11 p.m., air traffic control warns Ron Bramlage of heavy precipitation ahead, advising him to deviate southward. 12:12 p.m., Ron acknowledges the instruction but continues climbing into worsening weather conditions. 12:13 p.m., autopilot disengages. The aircraft starts losing stability. 12:14 p.m., the aircraft enters an uncontrolled spiral dive. Seconds later, in-flight breakup occurs, with parts of the wings and stabilizers tearing away. Impact: the main fuselage crashes in a remote area of Lake Wales. With this timeline in hand, the focus shifted to why Ron Bramlage had lost control of the aircraft so suddenly. The answer lay in three key factors. Flying an aircraft in instrument meteorological conditions, IMC, is one of the most demanding skills a pilot can master. Without clear visibility, pilots must rely entirely on their instruments to determine altitude, heading, and attitude. For those untrained or out of practice, this can lead to spatial disorientation, a condition where the brain misinterprets motion and orientation. When Ron lost visual reference in the thick storm clouds, his inner ear and body senses would have given him false cues about the plane's movement. Instead of leveling the wings and trusting his instruments, he may have instinctively overcorrected, making the situation worse. One of the most well-known illusions that disoriented pilots face is the graveyard spiral, where they unknowingly enter a steep, banking turn, believing they are flying straight. As they pull back to correct it, the turn tightens, increasing g-forces until the aircraft breaks apart or crashes. This is likely what happened to the Bramlage family's flight. Ron Bramlage was an experienced pilot, but much of his flying had relied on autopilot. Automation in aviation is a double-edged sword. While it reduces workload and enhances safety, it can also make pilots overly dependent on the system. When the autopilot suddenly disengaged, Ron was forced to take manual control, a task he was not prepared for under such demanding conditions. Instead of immediately stabilizing the aircraft, he made a critical mistake. He focused on troubleshooting the autopilot, diverting his attention from flying the plane. This momentary lapse, just a few seconds of hesitation, was all it took for the aircraft to spiral out of control. While the Pilatus PC-12 was designed for single-pilot operation, it was a high-performance aircraft that required specialized training. Ron's 38 hours of experience in this aircraft simply weren't enough to handle an emergency at high altitude, in turbulent weather, without autopilot assistance. The investigation revealed that Ron had not undergone extensive simulator training for handling manual control failures. He had limited experience flying in IMC conditions, especially without autopilot. He had not recently practiced emergency recovery maneuvers, which could have helped him regain control. All of these factors contributed to his inability to recover from the unexpected situation. After 2 years of analysis, the NTSB released their final report in November 2014. Their conclusion? The probable cause of the crash was the pilot's loss of control due to spatial disorientation and lack of recent instrument flight experience, which resulted in the aircraft entering an uncontrolled descent and in-flight breakup. The report also identified contributing factors: limited manual flying experience in IMC conditions, over-reliance on autopilot, insufficient training in high-performance aircraft handling. The findings were clear: this tragedy could have been prevented with better training and preparation. The crash of the Bramlage family's aircraft was not an isolated incident. In aviation history, spatial disorientation has claimed the lives of many skilled pilots, including John F. Kennedy Jr., whose fatal crash in 1999 followed a similar pattern. The key takeaway: pilots must maintain regular instrument proficiency, not just meet the minimum legal requirements. Relying on autopilot is not a substitute for hands-on training. Complex aircraft require extensive training beyond basic certification. Ron Bramlage was a dedicated pilot and a devoted family man. But on that day, a combination of inexperience in critical areas, loss of situational awareness, and over-reliance on automation led to an irreversible tragedy. A tragedy that left a community in mourning. Tragedies like the Bramlage family plane crash leave behind more than just grief, they leave lessons. For the aviation community, every accident is a case study, an opportunity to dissect what went wrong and determine how future disasters can be prevented. The loss of Ron, Becky, and their 4 children was devastating, but their story serves as a stark reminder of the importance of training, preparedness, and the dangers of over-reliance on automation. What could have been done differently? And how can pilots, aviation regulators, and flight instructors use this tragedy to prevent similar accidents? One of the biggest takeaways from this crash is the critical need for instrument flight proficiency. Ron Bramlage was not an inexperienced pilot. He had logged over 755 flight hours since obtaining his private pilot certificate in 1994. However, his instrument flight experience was severely lacking. Only 38 total hours in the Pilatus PC-12, a high-performance aircraft that demands extensive training. Fewer than 4 hours of instrument time in the past 8 years, meaning he was unprepared for flying in bad weather without autopilot assistance. Why is instrument training so important? Flying in instrument meteorological conditions, IMC, where pilots must rely on their instruments rather than visual cues, is one of the biggest challenges in aviation. Pilots who lack regular training in IMC conditions are at high risk of spatial disorientation, a leading cause of fatal crashes. The Bramlage crash is a textbook example of why continuous instrument training is essential. Key lesson for pilots: meeting the bare minimum legal requirements for instrument flying is not enough. Pilots must regularly practice in simulators or real IMC conditions to maintain proficiency. Emergency recovery drills such as how to regain control after autopilot disengagement should be part of every pilot's routine training. If Ron had received more advanced instrument training, he might have been able to recover from the sudden loss of autopilot. Another crucial lesson from this tragedy is the hidden danger of autopilot dependency. Modern aircraft are equipped with sophisticated automation that can handle everything from takeoff to landing. While these systems enhance safety, they can also make pilots complacent and ill-prepared for manual control during emergencies. In Ron's case, his immediate reaction after the autopilot disengaged was not to focus on flying the plane manually, but to troubleshoot the autopilot system. This momentary distraction proved fatal. Why is over-reliance on autopilot dangerous? Autopilot does not replace pilot skill, it's a tool, not a crutch. When automation fails, pilots must be able to take over instantly without hesitation. Many fatal crashes occur because pilots are no longer comfortable flying manually in high-stress situations. Manual flying skills must be kept sharp. Pilots should practice hand flying in real conditions regularly. Autopilot should be seen as an aid, not a replacement for pilot awareness and decision-making. Flight instructors should emphasize manual recovery techniques during training sessions. While the Pilatus PC-12 is a highly capable aircraft, it also demands extensive training to operate safely. It is classified as a single-engine turboprop, designed for single-pilot operation. However, just because an aircraft can be flown by one pilot doesn't mean any pilot can handle it without thorough training. Ron's 38 hours in the Pilatus PC-12 were not enough to prepare him for a high-altitude emergency in bad weather. Each aircraft has different handling characteristics, unique emergency procedures, varying levels of automation complexity. Without adequate training, pilots may struggle to manage unexpected failures, just like Ron did when the autopilot disengaged. Pilots transitioning to high-performance aircraft should undergo extensive flight simulator training before flying solo. Flight hours in a new aircraft type should be focused on emergency procedures and manual handling rather than just basic operation. Training programs should require more than the legal minimum because real emergencies don't care about regulations. The Bramlage crash was a wake-up call for many in the aviation community. Following the release of the NTSB's final report in 2014, flight schools and aviation organizations began emphasizing the need for stricter recurrent instrument training for private pilots, more hands-on manual flight practice, especially in emergency conditions, better education on autopilot limitations and recovery techniques, more rigorous training for pilots flying high-performance aircraft like the Pilatus PC-12. Many flight training programs have since adjusted their curriculums to reinforce these lessons, ensuring that pilots are better prepared for real-world emergencies. While these changes can't bring back the Bramlage family, they may help save lives in the future. For the residents of Junction City, Kansas, the loss of the Bramlage family was unimaginable. Ron and Becky were well-respected community leaders. Their children Brandon, Boston, Bo, and Roxanne had their entire futures ahead of them. Their deaths were not just a personal loss but a loss for the entire community. While nothing can undo what happened, their story serves as a powerful reminder of the responsibilities that come with flying an aircraft. Aviation is one of the safest forms of travel, but only when pilots remain vigilant, well-trained, and prepared for anything. The sky is unforgiving to those who are unprepared. Their final flight was supposed to be a journey home, a simple return to the comfort of family and community. Instead, it became a devastating lesson in why aviation safety is something that should never be taken for granted. The news of the Bramlage family plane crash sent shockwaves through Junction City, Kansas. What was supposed to be a joyful homecoming had instead become an unthinkable tragedy, one that left an entire community in grief. As the details of the accident emerged, disbelief turned to heartbreak. Families, friends, and neighbors struggled to process the loss of 6 lives, each one a beloved member of the community. The Bramlages weren't just any family, they were pillars of Junction City, known for their generosity, leadership, and deep-rooted ties to the area. Their absence left a void that could never be filled. At the heart of this tragedy was Ron and Becky Bramlage, a couple deeply woven into the fabric of their community. Ron Bramlage, 45, was the grandson of Fred Bramlage, for whom Kansas State University's Bramlage Coliseum was named. He was a successful businessman, known for his philanthropy and contributions to the local economy. Becky Bramlage, 43, was just as influential. She served as president of the Junction City School Board, tirelessly advocating for better education and opportunities for local students. Together, they built a life centered on family, community service, and a passion for giving back. They were the kind of people who didn't just talk about change, they made it happen. The loss of both Ron and Becky meant more than just the loss of 2 individuals, it meant the loss of 2 leaders, mentors, and role models whose impact would be felt for generations. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching part of this tragedy was the loss of the 4 Bramlage children, young lives full of potential, taken far too soon. Brandon, 15, a bright and determined student, known for his leadership skills and love of sports. He had dreams of making a difference, just like his parents. Boston, 13, a kind-hearted and energetic boy, who had a talent for bringing people together. His tragic fate, being ejected from the plane during the crash, made the tragedy even more devastating. Bo, 11, curious, intelligent, and full of life, Bo was always eager to learn new things and explore the world around him. Roxanne, 8, the youngest of the family, Roxanne was a ray of sunshine, bringing joy to everyone who knew her. She had a bright future ahead, one that was cruelly taken away. The loss of all 4 children in a single moment was unimaginable. Their friends, teachers, and classmates struggled to comprehend the sudden absence of the smiling faces and vibrant spirits that once filled their school hallways. When word spread that the Bramlage family's private plane had crashed, the entire town of Junction City came to a standstill. Flags were lowered to half-mast. Schools held moments of silence. Community centers opened their doors for grieving friends and neighbors. The Bramlage family's impact was so vast that their loss wasn't just personal, it was felt across the entire state of Kansas. People who had never met them mourned alongside those who had known them for years. A memorial service was held at Bramlage Coliseum, the very arena named after Ron's grandfather. It was a fitting tribute, one that could accommodate the thousands of people who came to pay their respects. Family, friends, former colleagues, classmates, and even strangers whose lives had been touched by the Bramlage's generosity filled the seats. The service was a blend of sorrow and remembrance. People spoke of Ron's unwavering commitment to his community. They shared stories of Becky's devotion to education and her students. Teachers and classmates remembered the kindness and enthusiasm of the Bramlage children. Through the tears and heartache, there was also a deep sense of gratitude for the lives they had lived, the impact they had made, and the memories they had left behind. In the wake of this tragedy, the Bramlage family's legacy did not fade. Instead, it became a source of inspiration and action. The Bramlage Family Foundation, originally established by Ron's grandfather, continued its mission of supporting education, community programs, and local development. In honor of Becky's dedication to education, scholarships were created to help students achieve their dreams. Their memory became a driving force for positive change, ensuring that their contributions would not be forgotten. As the community came to terms with the loss, one question lingered in the minds of many. Could this have been prevented? It was a painful thought, one that haunted those closest to the Bramlage family. What if Ron had undergone more training in instrument flying? What if the autopilot hadn't disengaged at that exact moment? What if they had chosen a different flight path, avoiding the storm altogether? The truth was, there were no answers, only a painful reality that had to be accepted. For the community, moving forward didn't mean forgetting. It meant honoring their memory, learning from their tragedy, and ensuring that their impact lived on. The crash of November 950 Kilo Alpha was not just the loss of a family. It was the loss of a future that would never be realized. Junction City would never be the same. But in their absence, the Bramlages left behind a legacy of love, generosity, and commitment to community. They may have been taken too soon, but their story, their impact will never be forgotten. The Bramlage family plane crash was more than just a tragic accident, it was a sobering reminder of how fragile life can be. One moment, they were soaring through the skies, returning from a dream vacation. The next, they were gone. For those left behind, grief came in waves of sorrow, of unanswered questions, of a longing for just one more moment. But even in the wake of unimaginable loss, their story did not end with tragedy. It continued through the impact they had made, the lives they had touched, and the lessons their fate imparted to the world. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, report painted a clear but painful picture: pilot disorientation, lack of instrument training, and over-reliance on automation were key factors in the accident. This was not just another statistic. It was a warning, a call to action for pilots, regulators, and aviation experts worldwide. 1. The importance of instrument flight training. Ron Bramlage was an experienced pilot, but his limited experience with instrument meteorological conditions, IMC, proved fatal. His struggle to manually control the aircraft in poor visibility is a chilling reminder of why consistent training is essential. Even seasoned pilots must continue to hone their instrument navigation skills, ensuring they can react swiftly and effectively if automation fails. 2. The danger of over-reliance on technology. Modern aircraft are built with advanced autopilot systems designed to make flying safer and easier. But when those systems fail, pilots must be ready to take over instantly. Ron's instinct to troubleshoot the autopilot instead of manually stabilizing the plane was a common but deadly mistake. It highlights the need for better training in handling automation failures under high-stress conditions. 3. The challenge of high-performance aircraft. The Pilatus PC-12 is a powerful and complex aircraft, designed for single-pilot operation, but that doesn't mean just any pilot can fly it safely. Ron had only 38 hours of experience in this aircraft, and that wasn't enough to handle an emergency in severe weather. This tragedy underscores why more rigorous training should be required for pilots flying high-performance, Single-pilot aircraft. Aviation safety is not just about regulations, it's about ensuring that pilots are truly prepared for the unexpected. Though their time on Earth was cut short, the Bramlage family's impact continues to live on. 1. Education and philanthropy. Becky Bramlage's passion for education inspired scholarships in her honor, ensuring that students in Junction City could continue to pursue their dreams. The Bramlage Family Foundation, which had already contributed so much to the community, expanded its reach, supporting initiatives in education, youth programs, and community development. 2. A reminder to cherish every moment. For those who knew them, the tragedy was a devastating reminder of how quickly life can change. Parents held their children a little tighter. Friends reached out to reconnect. Families made time for one more dinner together, one more conversation, one more I love you. Because in the end, we never know which moment will be our last. 3. A town forever changed. Junction City, Kansas, will never forget the Bramlages. Their names live on in scholarships, donations, and community projects. Their kindness echoes in the memories of those who loved them. Their tragedy serves as a powerful lesson for aviation safety and preparedness. They may be gone, but their legacy remains a legacy of love, service, and the reminder that no flight, no journey, and no life should ever be taken for granted. In the end, the Bramlage family's final journey was meant to be a simple flight home, a return to familiarity, comfort, and the life they had built together. Instead, it became a heartbreaking tragedy, one that left behind grief, but also lessons that will endure. We cannot change the past. We cannot bring them back. But we can learn. We can remember. And we can honor them not just by mourning their loss, but by ensuring that their story makes a difference. Rest in peace, Bramlage family. Your journey may have ended, but your impact will never fade.